Hello everyone and welcome to Pyanodon's Mods. This is a Taku Showboat joined by Ollie. Joined by Ollie, at least for now. With the release of Pi Alternative Energy, many things have changed in the rest of the Pyanodon's Mods mod suite. In particular, Stone has undergone a bit of a change. A really important change has been made to Stone in that now Stone also results in Kerogen. For every mining success you get, every time you mine, every cycle, you will get 1 unit of stone and 1 unit of Kerogen. And of course, when you burn Kerogen, we have our good friend, the ash spent result. So in the previous video to this one, I went over how to deal with ash. This video will be a bit of a repetition of that, in that how you deal with Kerogen is basically having to deal with ash. It's how you deal with ash is how you deal with Kerogen. Because if you want stone, well, you will have to, you'll have to provide in the very early game your miners with a fuel, and you can do so by using Splitter's whitelisting Kerogen. So, unlike with the raw coal setup, which this is a copy of the raw coal setup I presented last time on the ash video, this one you want to filter for Kerogen, and you can provide the Kerogen into your burner mining drills. And that'll consume a little bit. You can do the math based off of the consumption rate of the mining drill versus the fuel value of the Kerogen versus how often these things are mining. You do get 2 items per cycle here. I will note that Factorio has this really strange mechanic where with a mining drill, if you need to output more than 1 item in a cycle, the next cycle will not begin until both of those items of ores have been offloaded from the machine. So in the very early game, if you do not have loaders or do not want to use loaders, you either have to deal with the fact that the building will pause, or you have to design a little bit differently by having your machine throw into a box, offload into a box. The issue about offloading into a box is that your inserters will be moving at 0.6 items per second, and you're trying to get them to move 2. So even having 3 inserters around a box is not going to be enough to get that full throughput out if you are only using inserters. If you have loaders, or if you have faster inserters, you can, of course, get that full throughput, but it's going to look messy with inserters. If you have loaders, it's relatively simple. You can actually have a setup that looks a little bit like that, just with a little bit of a gap in between. Of course, by this time, you'll also have access to the full-sized electric mining drills, and those can paste in place, and you will get your full throughput from these machines, since they will be able to immediately unload all of the ore each cycle into the box. So with that mentioned, that mechanic discussed and talked about, Kerogen and stone. Of course, you need stone as stone. You also need stone as stone bricks. You will also be eventually also needing stone as gravel and various other things to do with it. And Kerogen, at the very beginning of the game, you don't really have much use for it. And while you can burn it as a power source, it would end up being a power source that would only operate for so long as you are using stone. And then it will shut off once you've backed up on your stone, because very early in the game, you don't really have a way of dealing with either one of these things. Now, you do have a way of getting rid of the Kerogen. There are a few ways that we can deal with Kerogen. At the very beginning of the game, as I showed in the way that we deal with ash, we can use boilers. We can use boilers, and we can vent the steam from said boilers. And then we just have to store the ash for the moment. And of course, we would use these same inserters to act as filter splitters, where on one side we can blacklist, we could also whitelist stone on one side, while the other is whitelisting Kerogen. That side will be Kerogen, that side will be stone, up to the lane, the single lane of stuff being output. And then we can do that, and that will deal with the Kerogen by converting it into steam, which you can then put down a tailings pond at the very beginning of the game, and it will vent the steam from the tailings pond. And that is basically how you can end up with a net amount of stone without having to worry as much about the fact that you're getting Kerogen out of this, just so long as you are on top of all of the locations around the map where you have ash getting produced. Now, eventually you do unlock the gas vent and the sinkhole. Both of these things require steel, I believe, so gas vent. Vent. Vent is not even steel, so you get this pretty early, very early, along with the tailings pond. So, you know what? You don't even need to use the tailings pond, like at all. Just use the gas vent. Make the gas vent, use it, and keep the ash, and then eventually deal with the ash however you want once you've unlocked the requisite technologies for dealing with the ash. So, getting rid of Kerogen by converting it into ash and storing ash is just one way of dealing with the Kerogen. There is another way that you will get access to relatively early on in automation science, and that is when you unlock the retorter at Kerogen processing immediately after steel processing. It's a very early automation science technology. With this, once you have steel, you are able to make the building called the retorter. What the retorter will do is that you can throw Kerogen and steam into the retorter and get shale oil out. What this will ultimately mean at the beginning of the game is that you will not have as much ash to deal with outside of the amount that you need for the steam to get this recipe moving, because you can make shale oil and you can dump it in a sinkhole. You will have access to the sinkhole from steel. So you can use a retorter, which is a rather large building, to take your steam from this build and then throw all of the remaining amount of the Kerogen into retorters. Now, each retorter can get rid of 5 Kerogen per second, so you would need 3 of these buildings to get rid of, like, a belt, but you're not going to have the full belt. You'll have 7.5 at most from an individual setup here. And it makes a bit of shale oil, which you could throw into a tailings pond and not have to worry about again, or you can throw into a sinkhole and not have to worry about it again. That's the early game. the early automation science way of using up Kerogen when you need stone. What happens if you need stone? What happens a little bit later in automation science? Well, a little bit later in automation science, you will unlock the reformer, not to be confused with the retorter. The reformer comes from shale oil development, and it unlocks this recipe, which gives you access to condensates, light oil, and heavy oil. Now, it is a tech that is a bit deep in the tech tree, but of note, you could convert that heavy oil into kerosene and use kerosene as a fuel, a fluid fuel. What you could also do with it, with all of those outputs, is further process, say, the light oil in a destructive distillation column to make gasoline and aromatics. Gasoline and aromatics, which this step should eventually be familiar to you, because this is a step that is involved with processing tar, which by the point in the game in which you are able to reform shale oil, you will be doing this tar processing, and I will have another video going over tar processing a little bit later. So by doing this, you will have access to aromatics through Kerogen rather than through tar, aka rather than through raw coal at the beginning of the game. This is a very useful pathway to aromatics and to gasoline. It's a very, very, very useful pathway to gasoline and aromatics, especially at scale as you get later into the game, which this save is later into the game. A bit later into the game, this save is about going on halfway into a pie save. Going on halfway, it's a third of the way through the technology tree. A third of the way through the technology tree at this point. So what you can end up doing later, and when you get access to titanium and access to burners, is a setup along these lines. But before I get here, as I place a bunch of random blueprints everywhere, before we get here, I need to talk about, well, what do we do if we then want to maintain an output of fluids? What if we want to maintain an output of the aromatics and or gasoline, and we don't need as much stone? What happens if we do back up on stone, and we actually want these products of aromatics, the heavy oil / Kerogen, the gasoline, etc., or just want the shale oil for whatever reason? Well, the first thing that you'll get access to is saline water. Saline water in the crusher recipe. You get this for gravel, and that's it. But you can crush stone into gravel. That's a key thing. Also, you get saline from salt later. You also get, at vacuum tube electronics, a little bit deeper, access to directly convert stone into water. But of course, by this point, when do you get burners? That's the question. Of course, when you get burners at the next tech level, so it will come in handy. So bear in mind that you can get rid of stone by crushing it to gravel and then converting the gravel into saline water. This process will involve a lot of washer buildings. If I can find my washers on this big list, I should have infinite supplies. The gravel recipe converts 1.5 gravel per second into a fluid that can be sunk in a sinkhole. You can void the fluid, so it's basically comes down to being able to fluidize your stone and then sink said fluid, or use it for whatever else if you want to use every single byproduct or product in your entire base. I don't know why one would try to do that. It's insanity to do so in Pyanodon's mods, because it has been designed around the concept of being able to get rid of byproducts in these ways. So we know how to get rid of stone now, early. Once you get a little bit later, you can get rid of it through burning on the Pi Science 1 tech level. You can burn it by then, and to get rid of all the extra infrastructure that you were using to get rid of excess stuffs. Of course, in order to deal with excess stone, you would want to have circuits to make splitters, and you could use splitter prioritization to prioritize the main usage and then get rid of the excess. And that would void the excess. And that, if you also have voiding of the excess of, like, the shale oil step over here, if you void the excess of this, of course, for that you would need to unlock the overflow valve, which needs circuits. If you are overflowing on both sides, the system will always move, but that would also mean that you will always mine. So if you are on a map where the resources are not, like mine, are not close to infinitely dense, you have to keep in mind that anytime you have a setup like this, where you overflow all products, it's going to always be moving and always be mining from that location, even if you're full up on both products. There are ways to deal with this using the circuit system to cut power, essentially, to the factory when you have a certain amount of stuff stored up. For that, you would want to use storage containers and check for the amount of contents in the storage container and or the storage tank that would fill up. And then if both of those are above a certain level, cut the power to the build. But that is a little bit more advanced and comes a little bit later. So now that I've explained the mechanics, I would be remiss to not at least go over what my own mid-game setup sort of looks like for stone processing, stone and kerogen processing. And it's really a setup that I will be using throughout the rest of the game. It may change in size with different mark level buildings that can move faster, but in general, this is what a complete stone kerogen setup will end up looking like with the requisite technologies. So the actual mining, in this case, I will note that I am using a separate mod from Pyanodon's mods that is adding in loaders and stacking belt boxes. This is Deadlock's Deadlock stacking belt boxes and compact loaders mod with the Deadlock stacking for Pyanodon's mod that allows you to stack Pyanodon's products, in this case, Kerogen. So in this build, I have a line, multiple lines of mining drills. Each one of these lines is producing up to 75 items per second of stone and kerogen with a little bit of an inefficiency due to just how the game handles the boxes that I'm loading into and unloading from. Occasionally, there's a little bit of a hitch, just a little bit sometimes, depending on what's getting used where, at what times. In this case, what I have done is I have set voiding of Kerogen on this line, this particular line, because I'm not using this particular line's Kerogen for further processing. But up here, what I have is sets of these, also making 75-75, where Kerogen is going up, and the stone from here is getting all processed into stone bricks, where excess stone is getting voided using Kerogen as the fuel for the burners, and then all of the Kerogen is going out into shale oil processing. And the shale oil processing, well, we throw in steam. In this case, the steam is being made out of electric boilers, so I can make better use of the Kerogen rather than using some of it to make the steam. I am then taking all of the shale oil that's being produced out of here and turning it into light oil, heavy oil, and condensates. The condensates are being removed from the face of existence, as is all of the heavy oil in this circumstance, and all of the aromatics, because for this build, the idea is I want gasoline, and I only want gasoline. I have other copies of this that are providing both gasoline and aromatics and heavy oil, but this one is for gasoline. Now, down here, this is all just getting rid of Kerogen. Over here, what I have is conversion of stone into landfill, because stone is also used for landfill. Of course, stone also is needed for landfill, and it's needed in very large quantities to get landfill. This entire thing eats up 60 stone, at least, more than 60 stone. It's using, yeah, it's using a lot of stone overall to make the gravel that it needs, as well as to make the direct into landfill. This makes 2 per second of landfill for all of that stuff. And yeah, it's just offloading excess that's not going onto my train network of the stone to go into landfill. So this combined setup produces landfill, produces stone bricks, and produces me gasoline, as well as producing, around 4 belts of stone, of stacked stone, so 75 per second each. And this is not enough, to be clear, of the fluids, but it's part of a overall strategy that you can use. So with that, I would like to thank you all for watching. This has been Otaku Showboat. If you have enjoyed today's video, please be sure to do all of the social and engagement stuff down below the video. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you have not yet subscribed, and hit the notification bell. Consider becoming a member of the channel by hitting the great big blue join button and supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/otakushowboat if you're so inclined and able. I will be back with another video at some point. I hope to see you all on the next one.